Hey everybody, I'm Andrew Ferguson of Redwood Fellows. Welcome to Stories from the Grove, a podcast production of Redwood Fellows made possible thanks to the generous support of CCM. You know, our media is filled with examples of people exploiting their differences to pull us apart. This is different. Stories from the Grove is about leaders who seek to lean into their differences so they can understand each other, find common ground to strengthen Connecticut. I hope you enjoy Stories from the Grove.
Well, good to be with you, Mike. I'm Ben Florsheim, former mayor of the city of Middletown. I'm part of Grove 3 for Redwood, so I'm still just getting started in this whole process, but it's great to be with you.
Great to be with you, Ben. Mike Rell, former mayor of Wethersfield, Grove 2 of Redwood, and I think you and I both were elected November of 2019
yes.
together. So
yes.
We started out our ambitions of our city and in the town of Wethersfield at the time. I don't know about you, but the stretch between being elected in November to, what was it, about March 13th or so?
Yep.
I had a lot of plans. I'm sure you did too.
Friday the 13th, I believe.
Yes, Friday the 13th. I'm happy to listen to some of your plans when you first got in the mayor's office. But I was looking at economic development. We had a couple new restaurants planned. There was a nursing home that had closed up and developers were coming in. So I was meeting with folks and had this ambitious plan for about 3 months. Mm-hmm. And then COVID hit, and you and I can probably share some of our war stories. But then you and I both pivoted at that point from looking forward on great ideas to day-to-day, even hour-to-hour, how we were going to handle, COVID and being the head of the city and the head of the town. That's a great way to, I guess, where we started our political careers. Maybe we can start the podcast that way.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it was certainly the defining event of that period, and I think still in terms of the conversations that we're having all over the state right now, it continues to be the defining event that we're sort of living in the wake of, and yes, that period, that snapshot of time between November and March. A whole could write a whole book about that period, right? Yeah. And then it becomes a completely different different story. And I imagine you probably had similar conversations, but as in the week of transition between the election and my taking office, I sat down with the outgoing mayor Dan Drew, my predecessor, and my first and central question for him was, "What do you do in case of an emergency?"
Oh, wow.
How do you approach handling crises? And what I had in mind, and he went out of the office and came back with the emergency management plan in this gigantic red binder and says, "Here is the plan for everything." And of course, we're thinking about anything from blizzards, to other types of weather events, to shootings, as is an unfortunate reality that we have to plan for, and terrorist attacks at a local or a national scale. There was something in there about pandemics. There was something in there about public health. But I was coming into office thinking about the first snowstorm. I was coming into office thinking about the river potentially flooding. A lot of weather sort of out of our control related events. What do we do in those circumstances? And certainly was not thinking about a public health crisis being that defining emergency, nor was I anticipating, obviously, anything that got to the scale that it got to. It obviously it transformed the way that we did business in the city. It was also a real wake-up call for me, for a lot of people, of the essential nature of the services that municipalities deliver.
Right.
And that when the term essential worker or essential industry became invented, that applied to basically everybody in city government. And you see the extent to which things like our water and sewer treatment systems, our road maintenance crews, certainly the police and fire departments, they can't be off, right? And in many ways, they are the frontline responders too to a lot of what's going on. And that also really highlighted, I was thinking to myself, in a crisis, I'm going to be talking to the fire chief if it's a fire emergency, or an emergency on the river. I'm going to be talking to the police chief. I'm going to be talking to emergency management. Did not think I was going to be talking that much to the health department director, right? Or that that department and their work was going to be so out front. But for me, I think, really clarified the mission in a lot of ways, that we are here to deliver the essential services first and foremost. And a lot of vision that can be built upon that, but you've got to be able to do that first and foremost. And
you mentioned, the fire chiefs and police chiefs. We, in a very similar way, it sat down, we got everybody together, came up with, the most recent plan that we could come up with, because obviously it was evolving. But then, and I don't know if you saw this in Middletown, but in Wethersfield, we had officers who had come into contact with somebody who had COVID. Yeah. And they, I forget what it was, mandatory quarantine of 5 days or something at that time early on. And I was thinking, first or second one that had to be off duty and quarantined. And then we got to, 10 officers at one point. Yeah. And, at what point is it going to be that word gets out that, first responders and public safety are not available? And, obviously there are folks who rely on them and need them, but there are others who might be thinking, oh, wait a second, this is an opportunity without the police around that we could, mayhem or not quite riots on the streets, but, crimes that people would never have considered may start to percolate with the limited patrols that we had. Yeah. Fortunately, we didn't see any of that. We were quickly able to work with the staff that we had, keep people out on the roads longer. But you're right. I mean, it was, the basic services that government provides. And on the local level, it's seen a lot more than, state and obviously federal. So those local residents were relying on us to make sure that the essential services were getting done. In my role, Wethersfield is a volunteer mayor. We were, one of a handful of towns that still have a town manager. So the town manager and I were kind of monitoring everything. But when the general public hears that, oh, you're the mayor, they think that the buck stops at your desk, when I have to work with the town manager. But my full-time role at the time, and it still is I'm a partner in a lobbying firm, and we were lobbying the legislature at that time. They were in session, and we got, the speaker had called his staff and lobbyists in and said, oh, this is only going to be 2 weeks. Yeah. Well, we'll do a deep clean and everybody goes back to work. Ultimately, the legislature shut down for the 2020 legislative session, but our clients, our firm's clients, had to deal with, moving forward throughout it. We've got Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference, the CIAC, and there were parents and students upset that the spring season basketball.
That was a huge debate. Yeah, I remember that vividly.
And Connecticut's CIAC was one of the first to say, we're canceling the season for, and it was right in the middle of playoffs. And then they canceled baseball and everything that was starting in the spring. And ultimately they had to cancel football in the fall. You want to hear an angry parent on the phone is when football, high school football is canceled. Right. But I was hearing it from the public in Wethersfield as the mayor, but also my client, the CIAC,
at the state level,
was hearing it, and we were working. The governor at the time, legislators at the time, were working with us. Executive orders were coming out, and we were reading those. But But we still have the wineries, and they serve not only wine, but they serve food, and public comes in. And there was a difficult period of, what is a winery? Is it a bar or is it a restaurant? Do we have to close them down? Do they have to be outside? So it was a time when I guess, the public was learning how to deal and what to deal with.
Yeah.
We were too.
Yes.
As it was going on. Fortunately, like you said, we're still dealing with some of the repercussions of that, but it's been 5 or 6 years of, transitioning from that and then moving forward. And I think a lot of the help from both the federal and state government and our experiences can prepare us, hopefully not for anything as large as COVID, but like you said, flooding of rivers or fires or snowstorms, anything that may be coming down the pike for us here in Connecticut. I think it was a good experience to get us going.
I think, and people would comment to me like, "Oh my God, you couldn't have picked a worse time to start." Basically, not that we would have had any idea going in, but there was also, the way that I thought it, the circumstances were kind of what they were, but I would talk to people who had been in the role for longer, who I think had a hard time adjusting to. Suddenly, this was the role was this very public facing role, and we should talk about town manager versus all the different setups that exist in the state and around the country, because I think that there's a lot of interesting. I'd be curious about your experience in the town manager system, and I think that there's pros and cons certainly to both approaches, but all of a sudden government had to focus on one thing. Essentially, we had to keep doing everything else, which is, I guess, the point we were talking about earlier. But all of a sudden, this had to be the priority focus, and the granularity, the detail of the types of decisions that we were having to make. Usually, those are you think of it being a little bit of a higher level, bigger picture decision making that the governor or the mayor or the council or legislature are involved in, but making these calls about what is safe in terms of school athletics, what is safe in terms of barbershops and nail salons, what is safe in terms of restaurants and grocery stores. It's not usually what we're cut out best to be doing. I think that there's the lessons to be learned is that there was a lot of preparedness things that worked, and there were a lot of things that we were clearly not prepared for as a community, as a state, as a country. But it was a time when I think of really enhanced actually cooperation between state and local levels of government, and between local governments as well. I think that the urgency of the crisis, in some places, it caused I think further division. And so it depending on what the leadership looked like, and I think depending on just the circumstances of the community, a crisis is something that frequently makes a divided situation even worse. And certainly this pandemic had its politicized. There were politicized elements of it. There were elements of it that were highly emotional, and of course, a lot of people were dying and was watching their loved ones get sick and possibly die. And so it was an extraordinary crisis, and that can have the effect of pushing people apart, and it can also have the effect of getting people together, saying we have to. Hey, the house is on fire. We gotta get the tanker truck over there and put the fire out.
And I think you and I, we probably govern the similar way, where it's bringing folks together rather than dividing. For us, it was working with the city of Hartford, which is kind of like for your area, Middletown may be the biggest town or city in your geographic area. For us, it's Hartford. So it was calls with, the mayor at the time, his staff, our regional health district, where we had health care representatives from the 4 or 5 towns surrounding Wethersfield, as well as I don't know if you were on those, but they were the weekly calls.
Yes,
the governor was having them. DECD. It all depended on it was almost daily. It was either we were on with the governor and his office and his team. We were on with Department of Public Health and then DECD. So it was kind of a trifecta of getting businesses and helping them out, public health, obviously with the public, and then the governor's office kind of directing all of it together. But we survived it. We served more terms, and then, happily earlier we said, we were retired from municipal government, but I'm sure if, like you or like me, and you were probably the same, you're still keeping an eye on things and what's going on in Middletown. I suspect.
Certainly, yes, we're in budget season right now, just wrapping it up in many ways around in the state and in localities, and I am finding myself very grateful not to be. When this comes out, everything will have been adopted. But as we're recording this, the state has just adopted the state budget, and municipalities are coming up on that deadline. And as is the case every year, there has been a wait and see at the local level. What's going to happen with state funding for education? Are we going to be in a position as we have been in Middletown, I think probably in Wethersfield, like many other municipalities, like most of them, where essentially we're delivering flat funding to a lot of our departments and to our school districts every year, and we're also trying to make sure that and there's been some really good investment in school construction and things like that. And this year, I think we got a budget that was a lot more positive for municipalities than we've seen in a long time. But even that being the case, the wait and see is one of the many reasons I'm grateful not to be at the center of that process this time around.
Well, we were given a bone, I think, early on during the pandemic. Our deadline for a budget in Wethersfield, I think, is around May 15th.
Yeah,
I think they gave us all the way out until July 1.
Yes, that's right.
So that helped at the time. But no, I totally agree. I don't know if you looked at them at the same light that I looked at them, but CCM actually would be the one providing the municipal runs. We would always hear it. What are the municipal runs in the budget? And you would want to get that number as quick as possible to then be able to set your budget. This year, I think it was good that the legislature, it's a short session, and the legislature wrapped up the budget earlier than they typically do. Obviously, they've sometimes gone into special session, and you're waiting for those numbers, and you got to put a budget together.
Yep.
But this year, they got it done pretty early, and as you said, there is additional funding for municipal relief as well as education relief coming down the pike. So, I think at least I would hope that most municipalities look at that and say, hey, this is great. We can balance our budget. We can maybe look at some of the projects that we had been putting off to the side for the last couple of years and maybe fund those. But just like the COVID money, this may be a one-time, shot in the arm, but it's not going to be there forever. And we got to, make sure our budgets stay, don't count on that every year.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I think but it speaks to the continued need in my opinion. And this is, there's a lot of obviously bipartisan agreement across municipalities on this, that the funding formulas, the structures need to change, because it was true. The COVID money, the ARPA, the American Recovery Plan Act, and all the associated legislation was an extraordinary deviation from what we were used to seeing from either the state or federal level in terms of just direct funding for municipalities to have a lot of discretion over what types of projects, as long as that they were oriented towards public health or community development. As we could use that to redo sidewalks, to build new parks, to make water and sewer improvements, to help fund our youth services program, all of which, among other things, we did. But those were those projects sitting on the wish list for all those years,
exactly.
right? Things that we knew we needed to do, but couldn't afford to without dramatically raising taxes or reducing services that were even more essential somewhere else.
Exactly.
So it was great to be able to get a lot of those projects done, just as it is great this year to have a little bit more support. But certainly when that money, and I know that this was especially hard on a lot of school districts, when that money went away at the federal level, it's you get used to it very quickly, and then you have to make
ongoing expenditures. You got to make sure that if you are going to hire staff, that you realize that this money is here today. Where's it going to come from tomorrow? That's always a juggle. Even today, without the ARPA funding coming in, it's, I always said the wish list is much longer than the need list. And, where can we fit some of those wishes into the need, and can we pay for it? And it's tough being, sometimes the voice of reason as the mayor, because, you've got obviously people on both sides of any issue, coming at you. And it's like, you want to say yes to both of them, but eventually it's like, okay, now we as a council, you got to bring your council members in together and say, okay, how are we going to do this? What are the priorities? What can we do? But I'm glad, that after, the year or two that we dealt with COVID, that we kind of got Middletown back on track, Weathersfield back on track. But I guess, we're two has-beens, if you will, retirees from the municipal level. But good to catch up with you. What have you been doing since being mayor?
So I am also. I'm thinking of it as remaining in public service in a sense, and it's not something that I really thought that I would find myself doing until I was in this job, in the job of mayor, and seeing and working with our school district and sort of what was going on, largely in the wake of the pandemic, as we've just been talking about. I am becoming a school teacher. I'm in school, and at the UConn NEAG. It's called the Teacher Certification Program for college graduates. I'm as we're recording this, I'm still taking some other coursework, and that program will be starting in the summer. So I'm going to have a very busy summer. By the time this comes out, I will be very much in the thick of it. But I'm going to be getting my graduate degree and my certification to become a school teacher here in Connecticut. My goal is to be in a middle school or a high school, and the big challenge that I have to figure out is which is going to be the better fit. But my hope, and part of the reason I never would have. Never really, and my dad is a professor. My mom was an academic. I come from a kind of overeducated family in a lot of ways, in the sense that I grew up on a college campus, and education defined a lot of my path up until the point that I graduated from college, and that was when I was getting involved in politics. By that time, I was so convinced I was just done with school, and I was not interested in being in a classroom anymore. And I then found myself thinking, as I was serving as mayor, I would visit schools for all sorts of reasons. Go to graduations. I would go to Read Across America. Worked with our board, with our superintendents. He had a couple different folks who served in that role. And I found myself realizing that I saw myself back there, and that I was interested in having had an interesting life in politics, and having had an interesting life leading a municipality, that there were. Where I had nothing, I felt like I could impart to a learner before. I found myself thinking, I think that this is the next step in my public service is trying to bring some of the lessons back to another generation, as well as just having I think something that surprised me when I was with young people, and this was from kindergartners up to teenagers, early 20s. And I was relatively young when I took office, but those are the voices that are going to be most honest with you. That's what I
yeah.
kind of found that when you are
kids say the darndest things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you have the title and when you have the office, it very quickly you start to feel like, and not in any kind of nefarious way necessarily, but everyone who talks to you has an angle, and everyone who talks to you is looking for something, and everyone, you're not getting the full story. You're getting a better version of the truth, or you're getting a more urgent version of the truth, but you're not necessarily getting the whole truth, and you're not even really getting necessarily the whole person that you're talking to, because they don't see you necessarily as, and this is the great thing about local government, and the challenging thing is that you do really get to know people, but there's still that separation that comes with the role, and kids are, if they're going to BS you, they're not as good at it yet. So you can kind of work with that. But usually they're not going to try to BS you in any way. Usually they will be very straightforward with you, and they will ask questions that you
I don't know about
of.
Teenagers. I've got 2 at the house right now, and
I think it's probably different when they're in your house.
Pretty good at BSing their dad every once in a while.
Fair enough. Yeah. Maybe.
No, that's actually great to hear. I didn't know that, and I'm going to follow up after this is recorded.
Yeah.
I actually went to college to become a social studies teacher.
Oh, well, we'll have a lot to talk about.
So, and I'll put a plug out to Brookfield High. My junior year, I had Mr. Chamberovich. He was the tweed jacket with the leather elbow pads, social studies teacher. And I really got hooked on wanting to be a teacher. 4 years of college, and I came out of college, and I said, I don't have the time. I don't want to go back to college. I don't want to go back to school. I needed to get a certification, needed to get the master's. Yeah. So I said, like many people do, I'll put that off. Yeah. And then I got bit by the political bug. As you talked about your parents, my mom was in state government for 20 some odd years. My father was an airline pilot. Oh, wow. And it was like, I wanted to be the teacher. I wanted to mold the minds of those that could be molded. As you said, the younger kids. Somebody had said, you didn't want to be a pilot like your dad? I said, no, that's too nervous of a job. You're always, what's going to happen? Is the plane going to stall, or we're not going to be able to land? Come to find out, being in politics, that, you're actually more nervous in politics.
It's probably a lot like flying a plane, except there's more fail-safes on the plane.
More fail-safes, then you can also put it on autopilot.
Right.
And exactly. Kind of catch your breath. Yep. When you're in politics, you really can't do that.
Correct.
And, going back 30 some odd years, I wish I had said, oh, you know what? I'll become an airline pilot and served like my father had done. Instead, I, immediately out of college, got a position in Hartford working at the legislative office building, stayed there for 20 years inside the legislative office building, in the last 10 years working in government, in lobbying government. Yep. And still is all connected. It's, either serving as a mayor, working in public service for the state, or lobbying for your clients to the state. So it is kind of the world that I grew up in, at least from my mother's side. And it's kind of kept me in that direction. But there are times that I talk to folks that are up in Hartford who are adjunct professors right now. And they have some have gone and taken the quicker way to get your certification. I forget the actual term.
The alternative route to certification.
Alternative route to certification. And they keep coming back to me and saying, Mike, you got to do it. If you still have a passion for teaching, your wealth of knowledge from 30 some odd years, you could teach a civics class. You could teach American history, American government. Some have even asked me to come to their universities and talk. I was just up at a event in Hartford last week, and somebody was talking to me about kid mayor or kid governor. And I'd said, we do something similar in Wethersfield. And he kind of pulled me aside and he goes, hey, would you ever want to talk to my class? I said, sure. I just like you see these kids that you don't get any BS from. Like you said, Sure. I'd love to get, so we've been, hopefully contacting each other over the summer. So sometime in the fall while campaigns are going on and everybody's kind of like looking at, some of national, some on the state's side of politics to kind of get these kids that are, this would be for high school, the 13 to 16, 18-year-olds where maybe we can hear from them and they can hear from me. But more importantly, I would like to hear from them what their thoughts are on this. So, it's great that you're going that route. I've got a couple more years on you, but at some point, that could be something for what I have a passion for in politics and teaching that maybe when I retire from the current gig, going out to be a professor or go through that alternative route to teach.
We'll have certainly a lot to talk about. And I think that there's and I have a ton of respect for, and my wife is one of them, teaches second grade, and has always long known that was going to be her career, and planned that through college, and went into her master's program, and has been teaching ever since. And there's also this seems to be a crying need, especially at the higher grade levels, for people coming out of professional and leadership particular roles in schools. And I think I'm also daunted by the whole thing because education, just like everything else, is changing in such dramatic and unpredictable ways right now. But also, that's part of what my interest in history and social studies is. This question of how did everything get to be the way? What is going on here exactly? Right. How did it get to be the way that it is?
History does repeat itself,
indeed, and you can see when you start to examine, and the big question that I think is it's the question for the youngest generation always to be revisiting is what do I see wrong with the world, and what are the problems I see? What are the challenges that I face? And how did they get this way? Is I think the most important next question to ask. How did it come to be this way? Is how you get to the answer of how you address it, how you solve it. And the more that people understand, this is what got me interested in government and politics, is that this is a world that has been built by people, and that we all have a role in a ostensibly self-governed society to govern ourselves responsibly.
Right.
And that is a very challenging message for every generation, I think, to learn how to teach the next generation, because it's always the same. It's always the same one, but it's we're communicating it in different ways, and now we've got the 250th anniversary, right? Lots of civics education focus on that going on, but I think with any anniversary of that magnitude, and I was watching the King's speech to Congress, and he said, I understand, I'm here as part of, we're celebrating our 250th anniversary of independence, as we say in the United Kingdom, just the other day.
Right.
It's still we're a very young country.
I was just going to say that
it's a big it's an occasion to sort of look at how do we get to where we are, good, bad, and ugly, and what kind of country do we want to continue to be?
And I was, that's a perfect analogy with the King's comments, because they are centuries beyond our 250 years. And in fact, last night I was watching a program on something about universal mysteries or something on History Channel, and they were talking about these statues that were found, 40-ton statues in Mexico, that they were carbon dating around, and they were dating them 1,400 to 1,800 years ago.
Yeah. And
here we are talking about Americans' history of 250 years. I mean, it's just a little blip.
Yeah.
But in that time, we are, a government that many countries emulate and want to thrive in their own countries the way America does. And it is, it's that idea of being able to teach these kids, like, where were we? And everybody knows George Washington was our first president, but how did he get there?
Yeah.
What did he do after? What did his successors do? And then you go and more to, to present day. But you're talking about how these kids, learn and through the experiences that others may be able to provide for them too. It was great years ago that you would be able to get a former shop employee from, UTC or Sikorsky to come into school and teach these kids,
right.
Shop class, as we called it back then. We're not seeing so much of that anymore. There are some, but those that come from the financial world and they've, had a successful career in that, and being able to bring that, because I know the legislature has just instituted financial literacy for these students to learn. But I think we also have to, as you were saying about civics and American history, let's talk about that to our kids, and because they are the future of democracy. And if this blip of 250 years is going to succeed beyond our years, that this next generation and the generations that follow are going to be the ones that need to continue that experiment of democracy for right now.
For sure.
Yep.
I wanted to come back to the town manager question. I was reminded of it because you were in talking about American history and the Constitution. I was and Washington in particular, who he's this revered figure, but he's kind of an enigma to most people. And I'm probably tipping. I just watched the HBO miniseries on John Adams, which is outstanding. Yep. Paul Giamatti plays him, and Laura Linney as Abigail. It's been out for years, but I finally got around to watching it. And you mentioned how many modern democracies have modeled themselves after the United States government and have written constitutions modeled after our own. But that one of the things that is kind of unusual in our system is that and this is in the Constitution, that the compromise that represents the presidency itself, where it's collapsed the head of state and the head of government into one role. Whereas King Charles is head of state, but you have a prime minister who's serving as head of government, and that's very common all over the world. And it creates the analogy that I'm drawing is that's very it represents something that was very challenging for me, and I think is very challenging at the local level as well, where in Middletown we have a strong mayor form of government where we are the elected mayor and we are also the CEO of the municipal corporation. And that I often found myself thinking, I think I would be pretty good at doing this over here, and I think I could be pretty good at doing this over here. And doing both at once is where there introduces, this is true at the presidential level, I think it's true at the municipal level, an enormous tension. You were touching on it a little bit too, just in terms of people expecting you to be the guy who could get anything done. And you still can't get anything done when you're a strong mayor, but people expect that all the more. And you are both, and we were actually talking a little bit about this dynamic in my last Redwood retreat with Dr. Paul Freeman, who's the superintendent in Guilford, was talking about how that role has become more and more public-facing, more and more politicized, and also still is responsible for running a school district.
Day-to-day operations.
And obviously, you also had you're balancing state government work on your professional career. But I'm curious about your experience with the town manager system, because I know the grass is always greener on the other side.
Wethersfield is only a handful of towns. 10 or 12 towns that still have the town manager form of government. And Connecticut being one of the first 13 colonies, Connecticut kind of what's the saying? Land of steady habits here in Connecticut. If you're going to break from the town manager form of government, which I think there were more of years ago, some of the public didn't want it. They would go out to referendum and ask that question. Yeah. And I think Hartford was one of the most recent cities to deviate from a town manager to a strong mayor. At the time it was, everybody thought Mayor Mike Peters of Hartford. Mm-hmm. Everybody knew him as Mayor Mike. He had the restaurant Mayor Mike. He was the guy that was at the first pitch of Little League to late nights at the city council meetings. But behind the scenes, the CEO, the town manager, kind of did the operation.
Yeah,
he was the face of it. But not a lot of people thought that of the mayor at the time. If they needed something done, they would call him and, but it'll get done. I called, Mayor Mike. It'll get done.
Yeah.
In my case, very similar.
Yeah.
The general public. The general public doesn't really know how the functions of government and the nuances of town manager form or strong mayor form,
yep.
or even the legislature, the senator. I've got folks calling me and they say, can't you just reach out to Congressman Lesser?
Yeah, right. Sure.
Oh, you mean either it's Mayor Lesser or it's Senator? Well,
that's right. There's two Lessers.
I just picked Lesser off the top of my head.
Well, we share him as a state senator, so we're right down the road.
That's a example where you really, the public doesn't know if it's the mayor they should be contacting, the state senator, or they want to contact their U.S. senator. And who do we talk to? So when you're dealing with the public that may be naive on how and who you are and how government works, they say, oh, well, you're the mayor. And
you call the shots.
You call the shots. But it was a relationship that we had with each other, and the current mayor has it with the current town manager. And for years, it's always been a working relationship between the two where, the town manager has his or her role to be able to, deal with the staff within town hall and throughout various buildings, communicate with that superintendent. All the districts have, but their role is also to keep the council in check.
Yeah.
And work with the council. And there's never a unilateral, okay, because I am the mayor and we are the council, this is how we're going to do it.
Right.
Mr. or Mrs. Town Manager. It's got to be that working relationship. And if not, you're constantly butting heads. Where in some towns that has happened. And the fallout is that the public suffers in that. And it's almost a stalemate in government where you've got folks that disagree with each other, almost like Republican and Democrat on the council or in Congress or in the White House and Congress. It's that, partisan politics gets in the way of things, but
it becomes very personal too when it's at the local level.
On local level, yeah. Everybody.
Yep.
Your kids are on the same ball field as other kids, and the parents personally.
Right.
They're your neighbor.
It's not just another person on TV, down the hall in the Capitol. Right. It's just they could be. It's an unfortunate. Development.
It helps in campaigns, though.
It does. That's true.
When the neighbors.
That's very true. That's very true.
It could hurt or help you. It all depends on how well you treat the public. But I always said it like this. It's like, listen, I'm not going to get into a partisan fight with folks because tonight we may be bitter enemies and bickering back and forth. But you know what? Tomorrow I'm going to be seeing you 100%. On the sidelines.
I think of it in exactly the same way, and I'm always amazed that people operate differently. They think that it's better to operate a different way. But I think again that's. Among the and it's one of the reasons why I think it's interesting to contemplate the different ways that the towns approach the roles. There almost is a built-in and this was less true, as I was talking about earlier. This was less true when there was a emergency that we all had to deal with together in the form of the pandemic. But as a matter of course, there is discord between mayors and city councils. There's discord between city government and boards of education. There's discord between municipal government and state government. And it's just, ultimately the reason that we have politics is because everybody there's competing priorities and a limited number of resources. And we all have to sort of, again, in a self-governed society, we have to figure that out somehow. And there is this, I think that when the less that the public is hearing about what local government is doing, in some ways, the better. Like if it's not in the news, that means it's going well. But that's a paradox, sort of a double-edged sword, because if people are not engaged or are checked out, then it's very difficult to have any momentum to any kind of good works being done.
And I think a lot of the work that I've done, and I'm sure you had done, you work with the counselors, town staff, city staff, to be able to, keep local government going. And a lot of that is not seen by the eye of the public. It's the work that actually keeps government going and services going. But it's and we're seeing it more and more now, is the upfront, in your face, on TV, captured on cell phone video. Social media is going nuts, blowing things up, and it's, as my kids would say, I forget the term, but it's going viral.
Yeah, right.
You say something and you get caught on camera saying it, or there is a potential vote that's going on where it's either a cut in this or it's got two different sides and it's turned bitter. And then it explodes from behind the scenes negotiating that we do as elected officials with staff or with your other counterparts on the council, to in your face, out front. You can't get away from social media because whatever you said or somebody said is being blasted out there. And folks are, as you were talking about, they may not be that engaged. So now they weren't at the council meeting. They didn't see what was going on, but now they are the keyboard warriors to go out there and paint a picture that really isn't true. Or if it is true, blow it up so much that you get more attention to it. And now not only are you defending your actions that you did on the council or whatever, but now you're spending time kind of on social media looking at those and kind of checking out what they're saying and trying to defend your record on that.
Yeah.
And, that's one thing, I'm actually working on with when my mom had retired from state government, she created the Rell Center at the University of Hartford. Civility, getting people engaged in not only local but state politics, because all the bickering and all that stuff that I was just talking about, it drives people away from wanting to serve.
Very much so.
And how do we bring civility back? And how do we get folks that say, despite the fact that I'm going to get beaten up for if I say one thing or the other, nobody's going to, what's the old adage? Like, I tick off 100% of the people 50% of the time.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Or I tick off 50% of the people 100% of the time.
Right.
That's what it is. But then you start to see that, the public may not be that engaged in the day-to-day, but they gravitate to a couple issues, and then it's blown up. And it drives people away from wanting to serve. And it's like, how do we balance the needs of, new people coming in and filling our roles when we leave to, tone down the rhetoric, because we want people to actually want to serve with a passion rather than just simply do it. But it's the reality of either post-COVID or post-social media, that everything is out there for the public to see.
I think that both of those are the big drivers. I'm thinking about sort of the general mission that Redwood has, is trying to think about how to navigate leadership in this current context, not even necessarily political context, but larger context. There's a lot of people who are involved with this organization who serve or are involved in this or that political role, but are not primarily, that's not primarily what they do. They're all affected by it. Yeah. They all engage with it. And there's just a total, I think the general diagnosis that I would give is that there's a lack of trust at every level among everybody. People do not trust institutions. They don't trust the media. They don't trust their neighbors. They don't trust what all of the things that sort of used to be the cornerstones of mutual trust are now kind of embody how much that is just missing, and that is driven in large part by what the types of interactions that they're seeing between government and the public, even if those are not representative of what is necessarily really going on. That is the point of engagement for many, many people. As they see that clip, they see that post, and they're going to have one of a few reactions. One of which is to get riled up about that issue. One of which might be to try to learn more, but that might lead to, boy, if this is what it's like, then I'm not interested.
I'm not going to do it.
Both in terms of, frankly, the complexity and the difficulty of a lot of the issues that we deal with. It does feel like that it was frustrating to feel like, especially when we're advocating for policy change at the state level, we're having the same argument year after year, but also just the personal nature of it, the possibility that you're going to be kind of attacked, and including physically, right?
Physically, and your family's involved, and at the time I was mayor, my kids were in elementary and middle school. Yeah, and how do they've got pretty thick skin, thank goodness. But one thing I was thinking, sometimes these issues were going on, how can they go and talk to their friends at school, like knowing that this has happened? It's tough, and I think as your kids or any kids get older, they start to, it may be more personal. Like if you've got high school kids in high school where their friends are a little bit more educated than they were at elementary school, where they're seeing the news or they're hearing what their parents are saying about your kids' parents, it's I'm sure, difficult for the kids to have to bear that. One thing I tell folks and even folks that don't really know government, they say, oh, you were talking about not trusting institutions, banks, big corporations. Don't trust a politician. Don't trust politicians. Politicians. I never liked the term politician. I'm not a politician. I work in campaigns and I work in politics, but I work in government. I serve in government. Right. I am a government official. It almost is like a 4-letter word, politician. And it usually comes from the person who's just got a chip on his shoulder that says, oh, you're just another politician. You're here today, you're going to be gone tomorrow, and the next politician's going to go in and do their thing, and nothing's going to change. You want to get that mindset or that mentality thrown out the window too, because you could actually, turn that person around by, providing for them and telling them this is what we actually do. We're not just politicians, but, your roads are getting paved. The snowstorm that came through, we had a tornado in Wethersfield that wiped out a large part of a neighborhood. We're there for you. We're not just, behind a microphone trying to get reelected every 2 years. We're serving you.
And I think what I found again and again at that point of you showing up and at that point of you having the conversation, explaining what's going on behind the budget, being there when, the house has been impacted by a tornado or a fire or something like that. Showing up at the Little League game or at the car show or any number. I mean, all of those things. That 99% of my interactions, truly, like face to face with constituents, were incredibly positive.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And it is whether it's just randomly on the street or in that situation where you're actually dealing with some kind of issue. And so it just that bond exists right at that point. But for the most part, again, if people's experience of government is, and certainly you don't want your experience of government to be your house burns down and then you get to meet a firefighter who helps you out. That's not something you would wish on some. Maybe the better example, maybe what you would wish for is that everybody attends Fire Safety Day and gets smoke detectors and so forth. Yeah. But if people's experience of government is not is primarily what they see on the news or social media, or what they just kind of hear from people or imagine, as opposed to going and seeing how does a fire department work, or how does the paving program work, and how does the budget get adopted for all these things. And it's I think that there can be a tendency to put kind of too much back on people have their lives to live and all that stuff, but the thing that does need to change, I think, if there's going to be any future beyond this 250 and counting, is how do we make it not a four-letter word, right? How do we make public service in general not seem like something that only psychos would do, and make it something that is a little bit more accessible in the same way that all of our other general duties are. That we all have to pay taxes. We are all subject to jury duty. There is a level of engagement and responsibility back to society that exists, and there's also a lot that you, as individuals, should expect from your government, from your society. And right now there's mistrust in both directions,
Definitely. And I don't know, I mean, I don't know how long our distrust in government officials has been, it probably since the day Washington took office, somebody had to have said, I just don't trust that guy. Maybe it wasn't Washington, but a couple presidents after him. It starts to become, are they doing it for self-service, or are they doing it for the common good?
Right.
And I think for everybody, you and me included, when we served, I've known you for a number of years. We had that idea that we were going to come in, serve the public. If I didn't want to run, I just simply didn't want to run again. I was on council for 10 years. But I'm sure if I did, I would have probably been reelected and continued serving. But I'm still engaged. I'm on a couple boards and commissions in town, and I still talk to folks. They still come to me with the ideas that they have. And, hey, can you share this with the new mayor? Or, what are they doing with this, crazy idea in the budget?
Right.
I'll listen to you. I'll help you as much as I can. But I'm happy to go home at night and not have to be, that forward-facing mayor anymore, to now have to deal with, the reality of being mayor at that time. Yeah.
I think it is something that has that does have, for better or for worse, has sort of a shelf life to it, right? I think that there are different ways that you can serve, and I do see it. I see the continuum being a straight line. I worked for Senator Murphy in his congressional office for a number of years after college, then served in this role and going into education. It feels like a natural continuum to me, even though they're all extremely different from one another in terms of what they're like on a day-to-day basis. But there is a point where you can be, I think, very effective in that public-facing role, where you're the communicator, where you are the central figure in the town. And there is a time when it's appropriate for somebody else to take that role. I think there's been there have been a few mayors in Connecticut who have served for decades and decades and decades. And I think that you've either got 4 to 8 years, or you have to commit to it for 50. And there's not a lot of in between.
I don't think my commit to 50. Yeah. But and just listening to you, I'm actually thinking about your role and soon to be a teacher. Is that it's very similar. You are, while you are mayor, you're shaping policy. You're shaping how people deal with their local government. When you're a teacher or in education, you're shaping minds and you're using your experience 99% of the time for the good. When you are a mayor or in local or state government, you are doing your best to provide as much good for the public as possible.
Right.
When you're a teacher, I would assume, and one day maybe I'll be in the same shoes you are in teaching kids, is that you're just putting your best foot forward. You're using your experience, your knowledge to be able to shape the mind of the child. And then when you come home, you say to yourself, I did what I could do as best as I could that day with the kids. And I'm sure you said it when you came home from a late night council meeting.
Yep.
I did the best I could.
Yep. And then now tomorrow's a new day. One thing I'm looking forward to is having a bell again. Can you imagine if there was a bell at the end of a council meeting? Because I was saying, now going forward, classes, meetings, it's not going to be 6 to whenever. Right. It's going to be 6 to 8. Yep. You're going to have a time when it's over. Yes, the interminable nature of those things could take a toll. But you still have to just say, hey, I did the best I could.
And you'll have that audience in front of you. And they're not staring at you with daggers coming out of their eyes. They're staring at you wide open, eyes wide open, wanting to learn. It's going to be great. Congratulations for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's like the worst case scenario in a classroom is that a kid is like sleeping, right?
You're right.
And I would take that in a council meeting. That would not be the worst case scenario.
No, but now I'm thinking you may get the parent who might say, you know what you did? You promised me you were going to pave my street 15 years ago, and now you're teaching my kid. I don't trust you.
I've got to be.
It's not just the kids. It's not just the kids that I'm thinking now. It's you got parents now. You like you said about superintendents. You're forward facing. You're facing, and you got to grapple with the comments from the parents about not being able to teach them properly, or why are you disciplining my children?
Yes, it is absolutely as not to the same extent as a elected official, certainly a mayor, but it is you're still a public figure in a lot of ways. And at my graduate school orientation, a lot of focus was spent on how careful you need to be on social media, which I think we learned that by going through the fire. But I've got, and the cohort is cool because there's people who are my age, there's people who are older than me, and then there's a lot of people who are like coming right out of college. So it's going to be an exciting group to work with. But I think especially for the generation below me, it is just such a natural part of interacting with the world is through social media, and but everybody can see it, including the parents who will call the school district if you're playing a rap song with swear words in it, that kind of thing. And it's just again, you learn that lesson through being. I've learned that lesson now in politics. You don't want to have to learn it as a teacher, but that's the reality and that's true for any kind of public service.
Oh yeah. And I even tell my own kids, be careful.
Yeah.
The last name Rell goes a long way in the state of Connecticut.
Yeah.
And it's got thankful, I continued my mom's legacy of it. And, people liked me as much as they liked her. Be careful what you say, kids. Don't post anything on social media that you didn't want your grandmother to see. Yeah. So
because when you're doing it, it'll be on the front page of the newspaper. Yeah. Yep. That's very interesting. So I'll just say as we wrap up, and this organization is a very interesting one because it's developing its mission as we go. I understand that there is a mission, but it's such a new concept, and we were always, there's groups of mayors who meet CCM, different groups of leaders meeting in different settings, but that cross-pollination is what is trying to be achieved here, and I think it's been a really cool thing. And I got brought into it by our City of Middletown Youth Services Director, Justin Carbonella, who was in, I think, the first cohort. And it feels interesting to be at the beginning of something in this way.
No, I totally agree. It's kind of a new idea. And Connecticut's a small state.
Very small state. Yep.
And, there are now 3, I think going on 4 cohorts. I'm in cohort 2, looking at, what did the first one do? What are we currently doing, and how can, it be shaped just like you shape the next cohort going in? But it's a collaboration too. There are leaders from various sectors, public sector, private sector, southeast corner, northwest corner. I mean, it touches the entire state.
Yep.
And I think being able to work collaboratively and get our message out in the future will start to resonate with the public that, there is a group of people who, for the greater good of the state of Connecticut, devote their time to better our environment.
Yeah.
Look, Ben,
it's a good thing.
It's great to see you.
Great to catch up with you. We'll be in each other's classroom someday, perhaps.
Definitely soon. Yeah.
Cool.
Good.